Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with Dave Berkman and Tim Armacost of the group New York Standards Quartet. Together they talked about their latest 2017 album, Sleight of Hand. So Tim is a popular sax on the New York scene today, and he has plenty of records and mileage to back all of that up. On the other hand, David is a phenomenal pianist on the New York City scene. He has 7 records as a leader, and he's appeared on so many others in collaborations. And this group has been dubbed this, a group devoted to radical reinvention of famous pop songs and Broadway show tunes. Plenty of contemporary jazz artists do that, but few more divergently than this vivacious foursome who delightedly cherish the originals while brusquely deconstructing their harmonies and tweaking their melodies, sometimes only slipping into the original theme on the way out of a piece. This is a collective class act. With that, please get to know them and dig this interview, my friends.
Gentlemen, thank you for taking some time out today to talk about this impressive album and your work together as a unit for over 10 years.
Sure.
What I want to do is start off here, obviously, with, kind of the elephant in the room. Talk to me about Sleight of Hand. I've had some time to really sink my ears into this album. It's a great listen. A lot of heart went into this. It has a great jazz feel to it. So talk to me about this album. How do you guys feel about it?
I'm glad to hear that you feel that way. Absolutely. By the way, we should have done this interview yesterday, and then I could have been in Holland. No, Scotland.
Gosh dang it.
Oh, well.
If you really wanted to get the visual.
If we'd done it last week, I could have been in Holland, and he could have been in. I don't know where you were. So, but, yeah, we've been, especially in the summers, we kind of travel a lot. But regarding the record, it's one of the nice things that's been happening with this band is we've been recording every year. So the records are starting to develop more of. They're less of a one-off and more a reflection of where we were at a particular time. So one of the things I really like when I think about Sleight of Hand, one of the things I think about is, the title track that we developed on the road in Japan. It went through even different names. For a while it was named for a Japanese food, and then eventually it was named for, we took the title track of the record. And that was, just to start there, that's a cut that I think sort of reflects a lot of the way the band functions. The sort of, it's a pretty simple form. It's the changes of, but not for me, with a different, melody over them. But it has this kind of playfulness that I think is indicative of how the band functions after all these years of playing together.
Yeah, I have been saying the last couple of months that particular performance is one of my favorite performances for myself personally and also of the band. It's got a kind of it sounds very close to the way we sound live, but we did it in the studio, and that to me is the payoff for having stayed together and played together for 12 years.
Beautiful. Well, let's speak about the 12 years. You say there was a telepathic formation of the group in 2006. Talk to me about how you guys came together.
I'll let Tim handle that.
We had a gig at Smalls. We had a gig, David and Gene and I had a gig at Smalls with a different bass player. And in 2006, kind of the way it happened was David, I walked by as David was saying to Gene, man, I think we should have a standards trio and go to Japan. And as I walked by, I said, yeah, no, let's have it be a quartet and let's go to Japan. It kind of happened spontaneously, and it was the result of the three of us being very connected to Japan and wanting to have a good reason to go there. All three of us knowing that there's a real love for standards in Japan. So it became a way for us to, the original impetus was an excuse to book a tour in Japan, and it's grown into something that we actually are really loving doing.
Yeah, I think another thing that happened is that, somewhere along the road, because everybody's involved in a lot of musical projects all the time. And one of the things that Gene was really focused on was that, and we all experienced the same thing as well, was that, so many of these projects become kind of disposable. You learn somebody's music, you put a lot of time in, and then you play 2 or 3 gigs, or you make a record, and then you don't play with those people for 6 months or a year or 20 years sometimes.
Or ever.
especially life in New York is centered on that, on like, you know, very often when people live in smaller communities, then they, you know, those bands kind of exist for longer, but especially in the New York scene when there's a constant influx of interesting different players all the time and all the great players you want to get to play with and all that, you know, we're in a lot of situations where you don't persevere, where you don't keep the band together. So after a couple years together, I think we really decided that we wanted to commit to keeping the band together for the long haul, that no matter what other projects we were doing, that we were going to try and prioritize this one and keep it happening.
Riddle me this. How do you develop the jazz sound that you do when you have been called a group devoted to the radical reinvention of famous pop songs and Broadway show tunes?
So you could say that for a lot of years, you know, the Miles Davis Quintet in the late 60s was a band that was mostly devoted to the radical reinvention of standards. You know, it's like, I think a lot of the music that the four of us consumed growing up was music that took apart standards. So that's a certain part of our musical sort of development. You know, I think the fact that we all played a lot of these tunes, Confirmation and, you know, But Not For Me and all these different kind of songs, you know, made the idea of taking apart these things and putting them back together as something that was part of our musical DNA. And in some ways more than I would say with, you know, young players coming up, somebody coming up in their 20s now might have less of a, you know, a sense of, you know, this kind of opening up standards or reharmonizing standards. That may be a less central part of their musical sort of raison d'etre.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys have been together for going on, you know, 12 years now. Talk to me about your evolution. How do you feel as a unit you have evolved, not only in your sound, but as just as a band, you know, coming together, cohesivity, and just the whole vibe?
I'd like to answer that by bringing up something David said about 4 years ago at a workshop we did, where he said, we've now played together so much that we really know each other's habits. We really know how each other play. So, for example, when David gets into something that I've never heard him do, I can recognize that very quickly. So if he finds something on the bandstand while we're playing, I can jump on and say, hey, wow, yeah, let's explore that. And same for him and same for everybody in the band. If somebody gets into some territory that's unfamiliar, then everybody else can jump on and support him. And that's something that we want to be doing. We're not trying to play the same music every night. We're trying to find something. We're trying to discover and search and find things together. Yeah, and that familiarity is what makes that really, really more possible than in any other band I play in. Go ahead, Dave.
The only thing I was going to add was the flip side of that is that, you know, sometimes in the course of a night, you also kind of want to coast. You know, you just want it to feel good, you know, and you want to, like, so actually sometimes doing the thing that's familiar is also nice. We have sort of places that are kind of familiar spaces that we can go in when we're not, you know, I think the flip side of that is that it's easy to find a comfort zone and exploit that for a while as well.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So, and just to answer the other part of your question, one of the other things that's happened is, you know, Gene and Tim have become two of my closest friends, and, you know, we really, since we've traveled together, we've done so much stuff together. Somebody told me a story a long time ago that they went to a rehearsal for a Joe Zawinul band, and the first day that they bring their axe. I think it was a bass player who told me this. They bring their axe and they go to his house, and they're all set, ready to rehearse, and he's nothing set up. There's no band room. And when they get over there, he's like, "Oh yeah, today we're just going to eat dinner together. We're not going to play. We're just going to eat dinner together because if we know each other, we're going to play better when we know each other."
Yeah.
So I think that experience of being together, being on the road, fighting, all the little things you do, as friends hanging out on the road, enriches the musical experience as well.
For sure.
I've heard that before. I've heard stories about a lot of real veteran and even legendary jazz cats that do that, get together, and it's about camaraderie and coming together. That's interesting.
And the other thing is we can start a tour now and we just pick up where we left off. We don't have to rehearse. The only time we have to rehearse is if we're trying something new. Otherwise, we can just set up the tune that we've been playing for a while and go. And oh yeah, hi Dave, yeah, that's you. Oh yeah, hey Gene,
right.
Hey Dikey, yeah, recognize you guys. Here we go. It's real easy to get started,
And that is really a different experience, I have to say, because usually the first night when we play together after it's been a while, it's always like, oh yeah, it's this again. This is something. This is a place. This is that's a musical space to be in. It's not like, it's great to discover something new with a bunch of people you don't know, but it's just a different experience to have these, kind of, this sense of familiarity and a certain kind of cohesiveness that just happens from knowing each other for a long time.
Yeah. Well, that's the mark of a good friendship, when you can pick up where you left off and that you just go.
Yeah.
So the one thing that's very interesting about your careers is that both of you have been very seasoned, and I would think that anybody that plays with you now would really learn a lot from you. But what I want to ask you is this. Over your career, between both of you, you play with a lot of names like Jimmy Cobb, Tom Harrell, Billy Hart, Sonny Stitt, Joe Lovano. There's a lot of names between both of you that you played with. What did you guys learn coming up through the jazz ranks from these veterans, these sages of the jazz stage, that helped you cultivate your craft and get to where you are today?
Yeah, that could be a long answer. Tom Harrell taught me something very specific, which was about arranging. I went to his house one time and we were talking about how it's kind of an unspoken rule that you're not supposed to put an open fifth in the bottom of a voicing for a big band. And I said, yeah, but I like the way that sounds. And he said, yeah, me too. And it was sort of like a confirmation of, if you like the way it sounds, you don't have to follow a rule. You want to know what the reason for the rule is, of course, which is it can tend to sort of anchor a voicing so it doesn't fly. So if you're comfortable with that, then you know how to compensate for it. But what it did for me was it confirmed that if I like the way something sounds, just go with that. To hear it from somebody who's 15 years my senior and had already been into a whole lot of stuff, that was really great. And he also hit me to Russell Garcia's book for arranging, and that was the beginning. He kind of got me started arranging for the big man with that encouragement. Billy, I think what I learned from him the most is to take the time and be patient enough to learn how to play with somebody. He's a guy who's pretty unpredictable, and in a good way. And if you try to force him towards something, he will resist. And you have to be patient. I learned to be patient and let the music unfold with Billy. Because if I tried to force it, he would just say, no, we're not going to do that. In the music, he wouldn't say that. He wouldn't say that to me in words. I think those are the two sort of quick, specific things I can think of. We could talk about that for a while longer, I'm sure.
Sure. I'll just say one quick thing, which is a lot of times what you learn from playing with older players is something about the depth of what's available, So when you mentioned Sonny Stitt, and that was somebody I played with when I was 20 years old, I was in a house band, and he came for a bunch of nights, and so I played with him. And at the time, it was kind of like, I knew Sonny Stitt's playing, of course, but it wasn't something that I was particularly thinking about at the moment. But, he got up and he played a couple of notes, and it was like, holy shit, there's somebody who can create on that level and become a kind of force of nature. Joe Lovano is the same way. Again, I played with Joe. Joe's from Cleveland, and I'm from Cleveland, and so I played with him on and off a little, when I was, again, mostly when I was younger, and it was kind of like, another example I remember is playing with Tom Harrell and Billy Hart together for the first time on a gig, and playing a kind of a blues. It's a tune of Tom's that was sort of a blues, and just feeling like, wow, you can play jazz with another level of intensity. So, for me, like a lot of times, it's like when you play with somebody who's an artist on that level, it kind of shows you maybe a vista that you didn't know was there. It's like climbing a mountain and seeing another peak that's higher, So these people, one of the really nice things about jazz is there's a lot of reverence for older players. I mean, I'm showing students of mine, whatever, videos of Barry Harris and, these different piano players. I mean, very tragically, we just lost an amazing pianist. Only a little bit older than me, Jerry Allen.
I know, man.
Which was just horrifying. But, these people are they're lights. They're, they're mentors. They're kind of stars to show you what's possible. That's what I always think about people like that. I got to hear Herbie and Wayne play duo in New Jersey about a month and a half ago. And, it's like those things are to reveal, like, something about what's possible, and it keeps you practicing and developing and reaching for that experience.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. I'm going to get back to the band here, and I want to know, what do you want the audience to take away from the experience of either getting your CD or seeing you live?
Well, I'll just say one quick thing, and then maybe turn it over to Tim, which is just, we sort of, I don't want to say stumbled onto, but this band ended up being sort of, connected to standards, and that's a difference from all our other bands. And part of that is about, I think one of the joy of listening to people monkey around with standards is that there's some material that's presumably known to the audience. Now, if the audience doesn't know the standard or doesn't recognize it through some permutation that it's gone through or something, that's fine. I hope you can appreciate it on a lot of different levels. But I think the idea of working with standards is to give the audience something to compare to. I know for me as a musician, I always enjoy when I hear somebody play a standard, even after a whole set of original music, because suddenly I know the form, I know the chord changes. There's a lot that I can measure their performance against. And it's like when you play a standard, you're playing. The person has both your reharmonization and what you've done to it in their head, but they potentially have the original in their head as well, and so they can sort of compare. And so I think in that sense, I'm hoping that it's user friendly to the audience.
Yeah, I think of it as a kind of an invitation to the audience to get inside the music that we're playing. A lot of original music can be very demanding. And I don't think that's a problem. I think it's fine to ask the audience to come in and try to understand your music on, your original music. But the standards is a sort of a friendly gesture, like, this is something, here's something familiar, and now come along on this adventure with us. See where it goes. That's one of the ways I think of it.
Well, let me ask you this. What is one of the nicest things that a fan has ever said to you about your music?
My favorite quote is from a friend of ours in Japan, who said, "Man, I love the band. It sounds like you guys are each doing your own thing, but you're doing it together."
Cool.
I really like the way that describes the music.
Everyone has a perception of who you all are as a band, as an organism. Your family does, your friends, your fans, but who are you guys? Who do you guys think you are when you get in the proverbial vessel to travel and you're on stage? Who are you? What are you giving the world?
I think of it as mostly like David Berkman, and then like these little acolytes that don't have much, function, but are. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I really think of it as a piano solo group, but oddly, there are these three other people that show up and do something. I don't really pay attention to them, but
they keep coming to your gigs. It's the strangest thing.
Yeah, they keep coming to my gig and they want to play, so I say okay. No, that's a joke. What I think what it's become, the band has become for me. It's hard for me to answer that question because it's sort of asking me to perceive it from the outside in some kind of way. What it feels like from the inside is that this has become like a central, one of the main things in my musical life. It's something that just by virtue of returning to it all the time, and having it be, having us as a group make the commitment that we're going to try and keep it going, which sometimes involves paying some dues to make that happen. I mean, I have to say also there are some benefits. It's not, obviously musical benefits, but there's even benefits in terms of we're a collaborative group, so we take on some of the risks together. I mean, it's really a collaborative venture that, it's like any partnership, So we all have distinct musical parts of our life that are separate from this group, obviously, our own solo projects, our own, different kinds of things we do as with other bands. But this is like a big chunk of where our musical energy is invested, and so that's something that's an ongoing, thing. I'm not sure I can answer I'm not sure I'm answering your question, and I'm not sure I know how to. Maybe Tim gets it better.
As you were talking, I was thinking a little bit. What's liberating about it for me is that it doesn't have to be about me. I don't feel like I have to get up and be...
So just actually the opposite of what I was saying.
What I mean is, that's right. What I mean is, and that's why I work so well with the David Berkman solo show, because I don't feel like I have to do it. No, that it's a band. We're presenting a band. We're a band, and a lot of what happens in the world doesn't really help us stay together as a band. In other words, we've had to really fight for it and commit to it for it to be a band. And after a certain amount of time doing that, that's what it became. It became a band. So when we get up on the bandstand, I don't feel like it's me doing my thing. It really has a feeling of us doing our thing. And for me, that's really liberating. I love that.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I think people on the outside would be surprised how often they're hearing bands where that isn't really the case.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where I think when you go hear a group, you always experience it as a group. You always experience it as a band. From the outside, it's obviously a band because there's 4 people playing or whatever, and they're playing together. But, the difference between really becoming a unit where you really are part of a group and not just somebody who goes and does your thing, that is a big difference.
I think that's a great summary. I think that's a great way to kind of wrap up everything with the group. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking some time out today to talk to me about the album, about you as a group. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Dave and Tim for their time, their music, and their stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.